You're listening to the Going Offsides Podcast, your home for lacrosse news, stories, and everything in between.
Well, Coach Byrne, thank you so much for agreeing to do this. You know, ladies and gentlemen, we have a really great guest today, a really knowledgeable one that almost everybody has heard of or should have heard of if you know anything about the lacrosse world. So thank you so much for giving us your time, and we look forward to chopping it up with you for a little bit.
Yeah, you know, I like not knowing what the questions are. So, you know, that means I can really make stuff up as we get going.
Yeah, well, that's about 50% of the show. I sent you a couple talking points, but it's really, you know, we like to let the guests to drive the conversation. So, you know, you were always in consideration for, or rumored to be in consideration for, pretty much every head coaching job for the last 10 years. And so the first question I wanted to ask you is, you know, why Harvard and why now? Even though it was really a year or two ago, but.
I know we're going to have to go back in the Wayback Machine. Everything's going to be all fuzzy and, you know, kind of romantic music going on in the background. You know, I mean, a lot of it, listen, as you get older, you realize how much important family is and your connection with your kids and not necessarily being comfortable, but also knowing when you have a really good situation. And I had a great situation coaching at Notre Dame with Coach Corrigan, and you know, having autonomy to, you know, drive the recruiting, drive the defense, drive our messaging out into the world. And so concurrently, I was able to coach one of my boys, one of my children, and my daughter was playing on the women's team at the same time. So, you know, you talk about happy wife, happy life, you have happy kids, happy life, happy kids, happy wife. Yeah, I'm usually not that happy, even when I should be happy. So I'm sort of happy sometimes, but everybody else seemed happy. So that raised my happiness meter up a little bit. And so, so when my kid, and so that was always, you know, an obstacle to try to overcome prior. And ultimately, every time that I had an opportunity to leave, and is that it would come back to that comfort, that happiness, that security. And so when Harvard happened, you know, some of the things that were anchoring me in a good way, not holding me back, but anchoring me to life and family and professional happiness. You know, my kids had moved on. My son Pierre is a high school coach down in Nashville. He has a regular job at Ensworth Academy in Nashville. And my daughter was in medical school. My older son lived in the South Bend area. And so there was less, you know, kind of the pressure and the anxiety of thinking about leaving. And so when the Harvard opportunity had come along, I had experience in it. I was one of the candidates 9 years earlier. And so I had some familiarity with campus and the process and the procedures and some of the people, and because I had been the same AD at the time. So, you know, I think the combination of the sense of adventure, if I'm going to do it, this is a great time to do it. It's, you know, it's a little bit of a turnaround, and what better opportunity to turn, you know, the most prestigious university on the planet and turn their program into a powerhouse. If you can do it here, kind of like New York City, if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. So all of those things coming together, Nick.
Okay. And to piggyback on that, because I think what we try to do on the show is ask questions so that you know, being in the lacrosse industry and the coaching industry, we kind of understand how things work, but the average person doesn't. So switching from Notre Dame to Harvard in terms of recruiting, you know, recruiting to the Ivy League is very different. It's much like recruiting to the NESCAC in that you're more committing to the process than you are to like an actual athletic scholarship. So can you kind of compare the two a little bit and let people know what it is actually like for someone to get recruited to the Ivy League?
You know, listen, the bottom line is it's a process at every place. From the moment that you have an attraction to a kid as a player, and then you get to know them personally, and then you get to know their families, you know, that's a process that's continual. But the first blush of love is you watch a guy move and compete and play, and you're like, all right, I love the way that guy plays. And then you do, and then every school within us is doing an initial evaluation of their credentials as a student at their school. So the traditional process, or the perception that you commit to a school, coach kind of walks your file and hands it to some person who has a big stamp and says admit on it. That doesn't happen. It just doesn't happen. Now, obviously, some schools are easier to get into than others. Some, the credentials have to be significant higher. And so, all of that has a movable part that is somewhat mysterious to parents and kids, a little mysterious to coaches. The better the school, the less, they're going to pull back the curtain and have you understand the process. So, relative to kind of Notre Dame versus Harvard is, not much more different of a, process. The credentials are a little bit higher from a GPA and from a standardized test expectation. But what the elite schools do, like Harvard, they want you to continue that trajectory of excellence. They don't want you like, hey, I committed to school XYZ, and next thing you know, you go on some, victory lap down the hall, and you got, Harvard on your sweatshirt, and like, hey, how you doing? I'll call you later. Everything's great. I'm going to Harvard. Is that they don't want that. They want you to be like, this is jet fuel. I've done really well. That's got me to this point where the school is willing to, say I can commit to the process of being admitted to Harvard. Is, we're looking for guys who are saying, you know what, I'm going to continue to work on my writing skills. I'm going to keep on working on my analytical skills, keep on working on my verbal skills, my math, everything. Because just like you wouldn't want a guy to stop lifting weights and working on his footwork and his stick, you don't want that guy to go on an athletic victory lap. You sure as hell don't want him to go on an intellectual. There's not as much of a difference in the process relative to Notre Dame and Harvard, other than Harvard has, and the Ivies have typically an interview process and a likely letters and things like that. Mostly is that to make sure that that young man has continued to do the things that you initially fell in love with as a player, person, thinker, student. And so yeah, it remains a little bit more of a mystery, but any sort of blemishes or mistakes that you make along the way, they'll haunt you, but they'll also haunt you at other schools too. So, gotcha. So it's more about maybe more the public perception or the public knowledge of the continuing evaluation that goes on. If you continue to do the things that you are supposed to do, in general, you're going to be fairly safe. Right.
Because, let's say, I'm not going to name any schools, but let's say public university A is a little bit easier to get into as a whole. Right. You might get your acceptance letter. They might give you your scholarship offer, and boom, as long as you don't screw up in a major way, you're good to go. Whereas Harvard, it's a and other Ivies, it's a continuing process. As a coach, you might need to have a little bit more oversight 100% of the time than you would maybe at public school A. So that's really good insight. I know Ryan had a question for you next.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Coach, you go from, one elite institution to, the elite of the elites, right? You alluded to some of those things, that some of the process is basically the same, but there are some things that you've had to adjust over time. Now, we've talked about it from the recruiting standpoint. Now you've, got your students there, you've got your guys. How have you managed the academic rigors of that institution, while, like you said, continuing to build that program and turn it into, an elite program? I know there are probably some things that you took with you from Notre Dame, but, what are some of the things that you've kind of had to tweak a little bit, in coming over from Notre Dame to Harvard?
I think the thing that you have to understand, or that any coach should really invest in understanding, is at an elite school with aspirations of being an elite program, that it all starts with the school. There's nothing bigger than the school.
Mm-hmm.
So you can be stubborn, or you can fight against that, or you can look like through the force of my will and work ethic and dedication, I'm going to make them change for me. That you have to let that go, because it's one of the reasons why Harvard is Harvard is, athletics is an important DNA in the history of school. But in the choice between those two things, nothing is bigger than Harvard. Nothing is bigger than the undergraduate experience. Nothing is bigger than the safety and health of everybody, whether it's me, an undergrad, a dining hall worker, they all matter. And so you have to come with that sense of, all right, you better understand that when you come here. Because if you come here and all of a sudden, wow, admissions is really challenging, or we might, a guy who's pre-med might have a lab that, conflicts with a practice. Like you can, if you're just finding that out, you're going to be really frustrated and upset. So I think before you do anything, Ryan, like you have to have a sense of that, where you are,
Mm-hmm.
how to work within that, that there's some struggles, but with the struggles, there's some really powerful and attractive elements too. And so, making a transition from Notre Dame to Harvard, that part wasn't different. You got two really strong schools, Harvard a little bit more, impressive just because of the history and its place in our culture. And it's, the number one rated school every year, pretty much in every ranking that comes out, is that's kind of embedded in people's mind. So there's a certain kid who's going to be attracted to a Harvard versus a Notre Dame or a Duke. Yeah, there are things that a guy might be more attractive to the Dukes and Notre Dames of the world because their program's higher ranked right now, or their sports teams are on TV every week, or I want to go to a place that's embedded and cemented in our culture, that it's going to be, I'm going to have, hundreds and hundreds of alums waiting for me to help kind of guide me through my professional career. They know that there's about 20% of the student body at Harvard are Division I athletes. So it's not like athletics is not part of the fabric and the DNA of campus. It's just, it's more balanced. You're not treated like a god on Saturday and go back to your dorm on Saturday night. Like you may be a great player here at Harvard, and your roommate is inventing some app or splitting the atom in his spare time. So part of that is the democratic nature and the sense of community at Harvard that is a little bit different than being a place that's a big time athletic and academic school.
And you just mentioned something that we had just talked to Terry Foy about this when we were discussing like the Ivy League's approach to this season, is that you're right. You are an athlete, and that is very important on campus. But unlike some other institutions where the athlete is put on this giant pedestal, there are other important parts of campus too, which are, we're not going to make certain exceptions just for one group on campus, more or less, or at least that's the public perception that's being put out there right now. Right. What has this spring kind of been like from the Harvard perspective? Because we get these little bits and pieces from these different schools, whether they may play, they might not play. There's a lot of uncertainty there. The conference is kind of saying like, we're not going to make that decision for anyone. So what's it like just from the Harvard perspective?
I think you touched on something that I think that I alluded to as well, is, regardless of where you might be, somehow the virus became politicized and science got it. So regardless of where you might sit within the science perception, then you have where you might sit within, a political spectrum, and then where you sit on this, how this may affect me personally. If you're someone who runs a small business, or you're a teenager, or you're a teacher, or you're someone who's a service worker, there's so many different angles, and now so many different venues with which people can voice their various opinions. It's kind of made it really hard to be somebody or be a school or a place or an organization. All right, this is what we believe. And Harvard stance has been from the get-go, from a year ago, has been, the preservation of the safety and health of anybody who's connected to Harvard. And, on one hand, it's an unbelievably noble and heroic stance to take. Like, we don't want not one person to get sick, which is both noble and, a little foolhardy in the sense of nobody can ensure that. But regardless of that, Harvard has taken this stance. And so every decision from there, if you agreed with that decision, then every other decision seems to have flowed. If you never agreed with that logic and that presumption, anything that happened since then has been like a reminder of, whataboutism. Well, that's cool. BU down the river a mile has all their students back, and Harvard a mile up the river from BU has, a quarter of their student body back. So, that's where they started. And, what I told my players and my parents and my staff is that, when you're at a place that has, the preeminent medical school, at least in our country and maybe the planet, the preeminent school of public health in our country or maybe on the planet, is that, when those deans come over and talk to the head coaches, which is what they did, you pay attention. And, is there, incontrovertible evidence around that this is, is safe and all of that? Yeah, there seems to be a consensus, but you touched upon something. They're worried about not just my health, the dining hall worker, the student, but they're also worried about the experience that everybody's able to take part. The guy or the gal who can't do their theater performance or dance performance or go into the lab. Maybe it's a little too fair. Maybe it's a little too balanced. Maybe it's a little too, trying to make equitable for everybody. But that's what they've chosen to pursue. And as a result, and I think a lot of the schools in our league, there's a different perceptions within that. But I think that's been Harvard's perception, which is we got to be fair. We want safety. We don't want anyone to get sick. We can debate the rightness and wrongness of that, but Harvard's been pretty clear since, to me, and to anybody who's an athlete and a student, pretty clear since last February what their approach was going to be.
Right. Yeah, I think consistency has been key. I think the one thing that people, I guess, and this is not specific to Harvard, but the Ivy League as a whole, been concerned about is that perception of maybe that there was a false hope of maybe there will be, maybe there won't be, but it's such a fluid situation. I'm not sure that that's fair either, because it changes daily. I mean, we have games canceled yesterday and rescheduled today. So I'm not sure that perception is fair. I don't think, like you've alluded to, there's nothing malicious in this decision making. Everyone's just trying to do what they think is best. And that's where the disconnect is what do you actually think is best?
Right. And listen, lacrosse, people want to see lacrosse. They want to see the teams in our league playing. And, I want what, strangely, people want what they want.
Yeah, right.
Who would have thought?
And if they can order it, even better.
Exactly right.
So, I think it's still, there's an unclear nature around that, because if you're the president in our league, athletics is one of the things that's on your radar. It's not like it's a Big Ten or an ACC school where, they were also concerned about being caught in a situation where, well, we supported football and basketball to some level. No one wants to come out and say, that those things drive revenue. They might not make money, but they help offset some of the costs to support other programs. And, the Ivy League, fortunately, is not predicated on ticket sales and TV revenue or bowl revenue. Right. That allowed the Ivy League and the Harvards of the world to make a decision maybe based more on principle and and student experience and student safety. And I'm not saying that the other schools didn't, but the motivation to have football and all the other things, which produce revenue, and then became a gateway for the other sports to play. And again, great for them. I wish, I wish we were playing right now. Practice. We're practicing with, our players on campus, and we're hopeful that something maybe positive comes out of the spring. So
exactly right. Yeah.
There's some costs coming down the road. Who knows what's going to happen? Who knows what this season is going to be like? And when I said to my guys, I'm like, you're a student athlete at Harvard. If this is your biggest disappointment of your life, you're going to have a pretty good life.
Exactly right. I mean, and one thing that I can just say, I appreciate, just from the outside looking in, obviously, it just seems like, you've done a great job of keeping that perspective with your guys. I mean, because at the end of the day, it's all an experience. It's all about having that perspective. And it just seems like, in times of everything, like it being kind of a crazy situation with the unknown, it just seems like, you're like a level grounded force for those guys. And I think that's probably helping their student athlete experience, right?
Yeah. You can only control what you can control, like I think mental health resources and leaning on your teammates, all things that maybe you took for granted have to become, the center of your program when you're dealing with the uncertainty in every element of their lives. So, we're trying to have some fun with it, and but we'll see what happens.
Well, and that brings me to my next question. So, I mean, obviously, you're.
We'll be back after a word from our sponsor.
You're doing things a little differently this year because obviously, we have the public health issues, but I know, you're huge, and, at Notre Dame, it was a huge aspect, and it's a huge aspect of what you're doing at Harvard, in terms of the student athlete experience. I mean, obviously, it's more than just being a lacrosse player at Harvard or just getting your education at Harvard. You're kind of combining all of that. And I've seen some of the things that you do, the trip to the 9/11 museum, what you guys did before. I think did you scrimmage Sacred Heart last year where you took the trip into New York City? I know your brother's a fireman and everything like that. What are some of those experiences, those extras that, you like to do within your program that you can see kind of being, staples for your program moving forward? I mean, I think, while it's such a great and tremendous opportunity to be a college athlete, it's one of those things that can help kind of, through networking, through a bunch of different things, just really kind of broaden their horizons and see so many different things and kind of, bring a lot of different things together for them.
I think the thing that, any coach who might be listening, whether it's a high school coach or a college coach, is that there's usually rules or limitations or prescriptions about, all right, how much can you be on the field during the week? So if you start with that and then you built in, all right, they're walking over from somewhere in the training room and they're getting extra help and all that stuff like this, there's probably about 4 hours a day that, in season that they're dedicated, minimally to their program, whether it's the travel to get to practice in the training room, if you're lifting before, doing film after. So, in my mind, that leaves another 20 hours of the day that, then you back out the, 6 to 8 hours of sleep that you hope that they're getting. And now you're somewhere between kind of 12 and 14, and then you have their classes and stuff like that. But there's time each day where there's an opportunity to expose them to something that's kind of surprising. And so I've always felt that way, because I've always felt that I should make practice to be the best part of their day.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't mean it can't be hard and challenging, and there's some good days and some bad days and things like that. But if you start with the culture that you're bringing, I've always felt strongly in that. And even if it meant the guy one day a week was going to be 15 minutes late or have to leave 15 minutes early, like if I'm running a program well and building a culture well, that guy is going to be so thankful that I supported him being pre-med or engineering or whatever, that I know I'm going to get that 15-minute back times 10.
Mm-hmm.
Because he's going to be so, thankful to be able to have the license and the autonomy versus being a coach says, yeah, you come here and study whatever you want. And then you get here and say, no, you can't take that class, because that's happening out
a lot of places.
Yeah.
So it starts from, when you start thinking about this kind of group of a couple of hours each day that you might dedicate to a speaker or a really cool article, or if you're traveling like we did when we went down to New York. That was our first official my first official Ivy League practice, and we weren't even in Cambridge.
Yeah.
Because I want them to think about the world outside of themselves. I want them to think about a sense of appreciation for being at a place like Harvard. Why would you come to Harvard and not take the classes that you want to take with some of the professors, not the guys who wrote the textbook, the guy who taught the guy who wrote the textbook?
Mm-hmm.
That's the guy who's the Nobel laureates in a variety of different topics at Harvard. Like, why wouldn't you take that guy or that gal's class? Why would you come here and not major in what you want to major in? Because we'll help you get to Wall Street and law school or whatever, medical school, whatever you want. We're going to advocate, because if you can do well enough as a Harvard student athlete, guess what? You're going to get the job offer.
Yeah.
You're going to get into med school. You're going to get into law school, right? All of those things, those attributes about you. And so that's how I look at it, Ryan. I'm like, because I feel this to my marrow, that if I recruit the right people, skills, appreciation for Harvard, pride in where they came from, and wanting to honor the people that helped them get to a place like Harvard. If I do that part well, and I give my guys the license to pursue what they want at Harvard when they're not with me, and they can be good citizens out in the Harvard community, when they walk across the bridge, Anderson Bridge, which is the bridge that connects the athletic campus at Harvard with Harvard Square. When they come over Anderson Bridge and they crest the top of that bridge, they're happy about every element of their experience at Harvard. And that guy comes to practice, he's ready to work his tail off. He's appreciative, he's prideful, he wants to find a way to contribute to our culture and our team. So I think, and then when he leaves practice, even if he got yelled at, even if he, didn't go great, missed a shot, missed a pass, walking back over the bridge with his buddies, and he's like, I'm a student athlete at Harvard.
Yeah.
How lucky am I?
Exactly right.
So those two things balance each other. It drives you being a good student and a good citizen, and it drives you to be a really good teammate and wanting to find ways to contribute to your team's success. And so, I know I rambled a little bit, but that travel, you're looking for, tap into the Harvard network. There's basically 1,000 living Harvard men's lacrosse alum. And I have a list, and I know what each of them does, where they live, where they work. So I can constantly put our guys together with them. So, and my guys know I'm doing that on their behalf. And all I ask from them in return is good person, good citizen, work hard as a person, teammate, and thinker. So
what more can you ask, right?
Yeah, it makes it easy to figure out going to 9/11 Museum and have my brother's firehouse cook for our team, because without me having to say anything, that's real teamwork. When you're at a firehouse, fireman cooked for my team and our whole staff. And in the middle of us eating together, they had to go out on a run. So everything's dropped. You got to dress in 15 seconds, hop on the rig. And my guy, I don't have to get up and say, that's real teamwork. Did you see how they all put their boots on? They helped each other get on the truck. Sometimes, saying less is more.
Exactly right.
Do you think that in a year like this, or the last year and a half, that, it's one thing in the past. Some coaches have taken this and made it a priority, the off the field stuff, more or less. Because in the past, if things aren't going well with the team, a good practice or a good scrimmage can kind of handle some of those things. It can kind of, ease the burden and solve a few issues. Do you think that this virus and coaching and doing a lot of online stuff and small group stuff has kind of accelerated or forced coaches to focus on those other things outside of just being physically with the players at practice?
Well, I mean, I think if you're listen, this was an opportunity. There's no case study. I said this, we had a speaker. I do a speaker about every 2 weeks. I do and there's no, and I was saying case study, you can't go to the Harvard Business School and find a case study and says, how do you deal with this? But there's examples all around. We had our team read a book called Endurance, which is about Ernest Shackleton. He was an explorer in the early 20th century who tried to traverse Antarctica. And the whole thing, it never got started. His boat got stuck in the ice and they had to get into the small rowboats, and nightmare. Went from a trip of expedition to a trip of survival. But there's no examples out there of how to do this. And so if you were someone who, felt like you had a great culture when everyone was physically together, yes, your culture is portable, but can it be portable for a year, a year and a half and stuff like that? So, and if you didn't have a strong culture, this forced you to maybe do things differently than you did in the past. And, trying to find this balance between control and accountability and individual initiative and peer-to-peer inspiration, confrontation, that's not a linear solution. So the cool thing is that for me, I felt like this was a great time to experiment with different things. And I had spent my whole career in coaching. So I was able to bring some different things from my corporate life as well. And so there's no perfect, recipe or how to do all of this, but being open to doing things in different ways, so like you can have a calendar of like, hey, we're doing this and this every day, but you still have to be open to finding some really cool video or sharing a documentary or reading a book as a team, or some funny thing comes across your social media feed and you share that. Like being open to delivering the messages of the principles of your program. It's not as easy as writing a script. I think
I would love to be sitting in my dorm room and get a what Coach Byrne considers a funny social media post. I can only imagine the kind of stuff that would pop up.
But I do like sharing things that just kind of
build community and that you can relate to. Yeah, for sure. So Coach, you're considered by many to be a bit of a defensive guru or defensive whisperer, if you will. So we had some pretty specific questions we wanted to ask you that are a little bit more tactical and get your, I know that you might think that there's a wrong answer to these questions, but let's pretend that there isn't. So the first one, and I've seen this done so many different ways this year alone because of the shot clock. What is your approach to defending the invert? And to piggyback off of that, what is your approach to defending a hung up defender with the ball carrier at X?
Relative to the invert, I don't teach anything different. I teach one defense, and I really don't care if our one-legged face-off guy is guarding Chris Gray behind, or like I just think the more defenses you coach, the more mediocre you are at defense. And so, but I think it's a little bit of the influence of football. Like, a lot of coaches of a lot of sports became acolytes of, genius football coaches and having, 73 terms for this. And I think a lot of that is driven by I want the outside world to be more so impressed by the complexity of what you might be doing versus simple is usually pretty effective,
Yeah.
and you really don't, and you don't have as much time as you think you have. And in the Ivy League, you have even less time than you have. And so trying to become good at one defense, but then while you teach one defense or one style of defense, what you end up really teaching is the nuance of how you guard and how you read help and how you stand when you're in the different perimeter roles and things like that. That becomes like the hard thing to discern. So when I was coaching at Notre Dame, like, people would say, oh, they're fake sliding. Like, I hate fake sliding. I think fake sliding is one of the dumbest things. It works on bad players.
Mm-hmm.
And so if loved a fake slide, and I'd be like, shut the hell up. There's no fake sliding going on. But what you're doing is trying to teach the footwork where you're evaluating whether you have to slide.
Mm-hmm.
And, sometimes when they do it wrong, they get their weight shifted on one foot or another, and it looks like a fake slide. So more often than not, it was just bad technique than a fake slide. And so teaching one defense, regardless of whether it's an invert or your face-off guys matched up against the best offensive player, and I use this example a lot because Will Corrigan coaches with me when I was coaching at Notre Dame. We played Albany in Lyle Thompson's last game, and Will Corrigan got switched. They did big little, and he got switched onto Lyle Thompson. And it's so funny. Like, you don't watch a lot of TV games. Like when you're coaching, you never watch TV games.
Right.
Like you're always just watching the game film. But someone sent it to me, and listen, it happened to me. Well, I won't tell you who it was, but like, oh my God, they're going to be switching onto this, and Will proceeded to go 15 seconds, and ultimately got slid to. Like, oh, they're gonna go early. And like, no, if he gets beat, then you go early. If he doesn't get beat, you go late. And so you basically teach signs of the way people are, signs of guys who are about signs, body language, stick positioning of guys who are about to get beat. I think that's an underappreciated teaching thing, because you want your slide guys and your perimeter guys to teach that. So I don't like, a lot of teams teach the you slide from the mirror guy and hedge down the alleys, which it works. Maryland, I think, was one of the first teams to do it that way, and I think Maryland has a great defensive culture. But a lot of teams do it not very well. So
rounding back, if you have a defender hung up, do you ever send, like, does Jerry Byrne ever send the goalie, or are you a staunch? You don't do that. Yeah,
I'm not going to tell you how we do it, but I think if you went back to watch 13 years of Notre Dame defense, you wouldn't be able to find one person getting hung. Ever.
It's true.
That's fair.
So some of it has to do with pipe positioning. Mm-hmm. I'll tell you how people get hung. Usually it's from a corner dodge or a wing dodge.
Right.
And the defenseman's on the near pipe. And then depending on the team, how much he's supposed to hedge or fake slide. And then the attackman drifts him or fades him across X. And then that guy, he doesn't want to chase him
no man's
behind.
land. Yeah.
And there you have it. So there's a little hint there.
There you go.
The key to playing the hang up is don't get hung up.
I didn't care about matchups, and like if you talk to any of the guys that I coached, I don't tell guys who they're guarding until after the Star Spangled Banner.
Gotcha.
So you don't go into a game thinking, oh, it's me and Ryan.
Yeah.
Everybody's going to be watching us.
Yeah.
Is that if you don't care who's guarding who, then you really don't care. You don't getting hung.
Okay. Ryan?
So
I think I'm in the minority. I haven't seen this much hanging since a Clint Eastwood movie.
You're right.
Did you catch the game earlier today? I
Yeah,
mean, Chris Gray knows how to hang people up. That's for sure. And so does Michael Sowers, and they love to just sit back there and wait. And I mean, I know Kenny Brochart pretty well, and he had a pretty good game plan for that today. But ultimately, if you don't win any faceoffs, you can't win the game. But.
Well, and it's not just at the college level. You're seeing it at the high school level. I mean, there are some kids that are putting up astronomical numbers because they get kids hung up. I mean, it's just, you go out to the east end of Long Island and that's all you're going to see.
Yes, you could be good. You're getting people a hump, Nick, like based on your drift play. And Chris Gray and Michael Sowers are both, two-handed guys, which allows them to play the drift follow game pretty well off of that kind of wing and corner dodge. But what you don't see, like a lot of times when they're talking about it, everyone's staring at the ball. It's like a steel cage match in front of the goal.
Oh yeah,
not an interfering
chaos
that is going on. The refs are almost staring at the ball too, like the moving picks that are going on, and So on one hand, you're like, if that's 60 seconds, they're probably going to get a good shot. I don't know why you wouldn't force the guy to pick a side. Like, I don't know why you would let the guy sit there and with no ball pressure, because at some point someone's going to get picked off, and they're not calling moving picks.
Fair enough. Right?
There's been, if there's been in those TV games maybe 30 hangups, I bet you there's 10 goals.
Yeah, that's fair.
And some pretty good feeds and saves. Maybe
Absolutely.
Probably less than 5 or 6 nuggets or turnovers and stuff like that, because when you're looking away, you don't know where the ball's coming. You see, the stick skills of the offensive guys are too good.
Yeah, it makes it really tough to play off ball defense.
I don't know why you continue to do that, but I don't know. Everybody's got their own way.
Well, Ryan's got a question for you about man-down defense.
I'm gonna go to it first, because I had somebody ask me, and I think he's already asked you the question, but for whatever reason, he wants me to ask you this again. What's your philosophy? Cross-check hold or V-hold?
Man, if you don't know the answer to that question, you have.
I do, but people want to hear it.
So I'll send you guys a picture. I did a clinic this weekend with youth kids. And I'm in a pretty damn good V-hold stance. So I was demonstrating to these other kids. They're probably all looking at me thinking, cross-check hold, coach. Cross-check hold. So
I had to do it.
Hold up to a point, up to probably about 4 or 5 steps from GLE. I just think, why would you make it easier for a guy to run the arc on you?
Exactly.
Why would you allow your body to be a screen for a goalie? Why would you allow a guy to have his hands in his eyes on the island? I mean, Chris Gray rocketed some guy into oblivion the other day. Cross-check goalie, brought his stick over late. Brought his stick over late. So I'd rather that guy run the arc through you. I think the stick are all kind of barometers of a guy about to get beat. And I think that's good for an indicator of how much help you need to provide. It also is an indicator of whether a guy's going to run the arc or question mark or inside roll. I care more about the other 5 guys than I do about the guy on the ball. And I think the other 5 guys are looking for indicators of, you doing stuff right and you doing something wrong, watching your footwork, watching your elbows, watching your jersey, all that stuff, or the guy about to get beat or not get beat. So I like the disruptive, so many attackmen are so talented on kind of into your body and step away. When you're cross-check, hold, and pinned, the head of your stick and your shaft are not part of the disruption. And now the guy steps away, redodges you, steps away, skips, if you wanted to go watch and see how many feet says Chris Gray and Michael Sowers have running away from the goal with no ball pressure.
Yeah. Well, it's like Asher Nolting today. Like you need to pressure the ball.
Skipping, lever feeding into the crease. It's an epidemic.
Yep. It's amazing. Get your stick in hands. People don't appreciate that.
Yeah, but you also have to be okay with not having your ego tied up in like, oh, they don't slide to me, I'm really good on the number one defenseman. Everybody gets slid to. Yeah. Everybody. So if you take that part out of it and just like, I gotta guard this guy for 5 seconds. And if I can guard him for 5, maybe I can get to 6, 7, 8.
Yep.
And if I got 5 guys who are ready to snap into action.
Very well put. I feel a lot smarter already. It's one thing. Well, Coach, what you do so well is it's one thing to know the right answer. It's another thing to know why. And so it's about teaching people the why of why we're doing these things. Because it's so easy to just see like, oh yeah, we do this because this is how it's supposed to be done. Like that's what everyone knows. But like to actually like tell, and I think that's what kids these days need a little bit more of, is they always want to know why we're doing whatever.
You got to teach the why. You got to teach the why.
So I mean, it's a valid point, because if you teach them why, they have a better understanding of the whole thing, and then they're more bought into it, as opposed to just because I said so. That doesn't really work anymore.
No, you touched on like basically a fundamental thing of how I coach. I think, you can fight this generation needing that explanation, or you can use it as a tool. Mm-hmm. And the way I present it is, here's the benefit of doing it right, and what we gain, what your 5 teammates gain, and here's the cost of doing it wrong. And nobody wants to do anything to hurt their team. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So and whenever we do like film, we'll juxtapose right versus wrong, so that they can see, when your head of your stick was in that guy's glove with ball pressure, you did it so well. They had 2 open guys. They had a skip open and they had a crease guy open, but because on that bounce, his stick was being disruptive on the guy's glove, he had to drop his other hand off of it, versus the guy who's driving out, trying to get his cross-check hold on a guy. And now Michael Sowers is bouncing, or Chris Gray's bouncing, and he's like, crease, lever, goal, mm-hmm. Bounce, skip, step down, goal.
Or it just gets pushed.
No, you juxtapose these 2 things, and then it makes it really easy when you're coaching them. I'm like, don't do that. You did that wrong. Mm-hmm. That was a cost. So yeah, the why is really important, and it's them understanding how this contributes to really good team defense. That you're part of a group. You're not on some island and it's mano a mano, you against the other guy. It's 6 people.
And then Ryan, you had one more tactical question, I think, about man down defense.
Yeah. So, I mean, Coach, and I know, we've been keeping you, but this is such great stuff. I mean, I love having the opportunity to chat with you about this stuff. I mean, what are your thoughts? I mean, I know you guys might run something a little bit different, but 4-man or 5-man on man down. What are your thoughts on that? I think a lot of that stems from, how's your goalie? Mm-hmm. I like really vanilla defense in 6-on-6, but I like really kind of saucy, disruptive on man down. But even that's driven by, do you have good nugget guys? Do you have guys who have a sense of when they can jump, or, when they can jump and get pressure and steal 5 seconds? You have really do that, you can be really good on defense. And so for mm-hmm. not my whole time, but for the predominance of time, probably my first 10 years at Notre Dame, we were absurd. We had good goalies, but we also had kid Andrew Irving, who was an absurd nugget guy. He was a 5'7" LSM the original number 50. Absurd nugget guy. Eddie Glazner was unreal up there. John Sexton was unbelievable up there. Like you need really good top guys. Because if you want to be 4-man, Ryan, against a 3-3 for as long as you can be, you need guys who have great footwork and what I say, who can read feet or read body language. What's a guy doing? And so when you have really good guys at the top of your man down, you can really do some things. And if you have a goalie too, and my whole concept on man down was, let's give up one really good shot. Obviously if you don't give up any, that's great, but make it really hard. Make it really hard to do it. And so
So 4-man and 5-man, 4-man into 5-man.
Yep.
You know, I was never really great at kind of like shutting guys off and doing things like that. But we had some years where we were really good in the Nugget world, particularly against teams that are running plays and jumping guys and stuff like that. So a little bit of both, Ryan.
Right, and to your point, and this is probably more directed towards youth and high school coaches, but if you run into a team that runs plays, if you can dial up the pressure on a man down, you can really be disruptive, because as soon as that first pass doesn't go the direction it's supposed to go, those kids start to lose it and they've lost all advantage from being man up. So if you run into a team that does do plays like that on man up,
if I was back coaching a high school team, I'd be.
Oh, we send pressure constantly. We jump as many passes, especially if we can dictate the direction that the ball is going to go, then we just start jumping it a little bit faster and faster and faster until something good happens.
Your defensive culture has to be really strong to have a really disciplined, don't get a lot of penalties, things. And that was the thing, Ryan, like we probably averaged 2 penalties.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that just comes down with and that's 30 penalties a year. And that just comes from the identity that you build within your defense. I mean, and a lot of the stuff that I've kind of, and just having watched some of the stuff, and thankfully too, I mean, you're one of the first guys and the programs you've been with, one of the first programs that actually have put this stuff on YouTube for people to see. Like, you haven't been selfish in the sense that, you've been willing to share some of this skill development type stuff. So, I mean, a lot of the stuff that you're talking about, you spend a tremendous amount of time in practice developing these skills and then transition it over to when you actually, put it in place during, your 6-on-6 set or your man down set in practice and then on game day.
Yeah, I mean, there were entire weeks where most of my practice plans were drills from the ND YouTube channel. So, I mean,
well, now it's from the Harvard channel.
Exactly.
HLX experience.
There you go.
That's right.
Coach, I had one more question for you, because I was talking to somebody about this the other day. We're talking about T99, and I couldn't for the life of me remember. You had mentioned this in previously in an article or something. How the heck does somebody that grew up on Long Island and played lacrosse in New York and then coached at Notre Dame for a long time,
one of Levittown's favorite sons,
how the heck did you end up running a premier recruiting event in Texas?
That's a good question. So, my girl I was dating when I was getting my MBA at Notre Dame, we ended up, continuing to date, and with a couple of timeouts here and there, in case my wife listens to this. But then I was working in New York, and she was in medical school in Texas. So I joke with my kids. She put the original 10-man ride on me, and I moved.
That's the first.
I moved to Houston. I moved to Houston to 3 down pressure. It was unbelievable. And so I moved to. We lived together in Houston, and I played down there, and then we moved, and then. When I got back into coaching, I was like, I got some good relationships down there. Top 205 was huge. Yep. There wasn't another regional event, and Texas lacrosse was kind of blowing up. And so I started doing it in Houston, and then we did it in the Woodlands, which is about 45 minutes an hour outside Houston, and then went to Dallas.
That's the first event I ever recruited at.
Yeah, we used to have a good time down there.
I was going to say, Coach Colin always tells me, he's like, if there's one event you should try and go.
That's the one, man.
That's the one. He's like, I had so much fun.
Jack Sandler, who I'm not sure if you guys know. Jack,
God rest his soul, man.
God rest Jack. So Jack Sandler and Ryan Wellner were my two, my left hand, my left hand and right hand men down there. So yeah, we had, and Brendan Dawson was coaching at Aurora or Salisbury at that time. So I had all these young guys. I like hanging out with the young guys to keep you young.
Yeah. They tell you great stories too.
All right, Coach. Well, I'll leave you with one final question, kind of a quick hitter. If you could offer a young aspiring, maybe a younger assistant coach at the college level, one piece of advice, what would it be?
One piece of advice is, there is no small enough job for you to do at anything that you're doing. Meaning, if you get on the staff for an event, come early, stay late, ask questions, contribute to the excellence of an event. If you're on the staff, you're a volunteer or an ops person, like you're taking in all this knowledge. It's like Brando said, there's no such thing as a small role, just small actors.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I think, and that's what I'm looking for. Neil Hutchinson, who's my head assistant here at Harvard, I didn't really know him that well, and I usually made it my business to know a lot of the young guys because I was always trying to play basketball. The whole time I'm sitting in a chair recruiting, I was thinking about the pickup basketball.
That's it.
That was going to happen. So I'd always be talking to the young guys. I'm like, you play hoop? You play hoop? And I felt that was like a great way to meet maybe guys who I would coach with down the road. And so when I was, when we were looking for someone at Notre Dame, Neil Hutchinson was an easy pick. He had an unbelievable reputation, hardworking, diligent, curious, prideful, confident, but with humility around, he had done a little bit of everything, and so I think those guys, you're going to find yourself moving up the ladder pretty quickly if your aspiration is to continue to move up there. But as an assistant coach, and you're already on a staff, is know your role and be really, really good at it. And then, because I think a lot of guys get caught up in, I got to add this skill. I got to add this skill. Guess what? If you're really good at something, you'll always have a job. So I think guys worry about their kind of resumes and all of that stuff instead of, I better be really, really good at least one thing.
Yeah. Well,
because every staff is going to have somebody that's their thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Not that being a generalist is bad, but pick one thing and be great at it.
Yeah.
I think that's also part of guys trying to move up too quickly. They try to expand, push themselves outwards in all these different directions instead of just being known for that one thing. Because no one's going to know you as an average graphics guy or an average face-off coach. But if you're a really great at anything, like you said, that's what people are going to look for you for. So I think that's really, really sound advice for any young. Ryan's been a coach for a while. I've been a coach. We're both high school, middle school teachers at the moment, but that is honestly great advice to anybody that's listening, because, if you try to move up too fast, or if you try to think you're bigger than your position, like, things aren't going to go well. I started off as an high school coach and then an ops guy and then a film coordinator before I got my first NAI head coaching job. Ryan, you were a D3 grad assistant in Alabama, right?
I lived in Arkansas. Then I moved back to New York, where I was a part-time assistant and worked for a water company for 4 years before I got my first head coaching job. And then I had to move down to Tennessee. Listen, at the end of the day too, it's all part of our story. And I think that always kind of gets lost into it. But you said it perfectly. It's like, there's never any easy part. You got to be willing to put in the work. And if you're not going to get to where you want to be.
Yeah. There's no easy road to being a college head coach. That's for sure. So unless you have incredible pedigree and you happen to play at Harvard and we're an All-American or something like that. So that doesn't hurt for anyone listening. But all right, Coach, we'll let you get going. It's time for dinner anyway, right? Thank you.
Coach, you're the best. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
If you enjoyed the show, be sure to subscribe, give us a review, and follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Going Offsides.